Hello again, my name's Mrs. White, and I'm about to read you chapter 1 of The Hag Storm by Victoria Williamson. So snuggle up tight with someone you love, make sure that all the doors are shut, that you're wrapped up in a blanket, and let's begin our reading. Hey Rab, do you think if we'll dig deep enough we'll find buried treasure? Gil poked the hard mud again with his hoe, upsetting the pile of stones Rab was trying to rake into his basket. Rab rolled his eyes at his younger brother and set to work, picking them up one by one. We can dig all the way from Scotland to India and we still willna find the brains you're missing, you wee dafty, he muttered. Clearing rocks from the barren field was back-breaking work, and Rab was ready to drop from exhaustion. He was starting to regret picking up all the biggest stones to save his brother's smallest arms. Gil still had plenty of air left in his lungs to blether, and Rab was too tired to keep up with his endless chatter. But back in the days of adventure, when William Wallace and his brave lads were running about the country, fighting invaders, maybe they hid some of their stash in the countryside for safekeeping, you know, Gil said eagerly, too excited by the thought of ancient gold to notice that Rab was ready to clobber him for prattling instead of working. Aye, that's right. Maybe the bravest hero in all of Scotland chose this god-forsaken spit of farmland to bury his army's money hundreds of years ago, Rab snorted. Maybe it's no a worthless piece of dirt in the middle of nowhere after all. Maybe it's a treasure chest waiting to be opened. So go find it, Gil. Get digging. Rab gave his brother a shove, directing him to the next patch to be cleared. "Ach, Rab, you're no fun any more," Gil grumbled. "It's no that bad here, is it?" Rab's only reply was to toss another stone into his basket so hard that it bounced out again. He sighed wearily and stretched, trying to iron out all the kinks that had turned his back into a scrunched-up accordion. Gil already knew the answer to that question anyhow. They both missed their old life at the cottage in Alloway, with the school across the road, and their friends living nearby, ready for a game of soldiers after lessons. Here life was like a fight of survival, like nothing Rab had ever known before. Mount Oliphant looked pretty enough in October, Rab could admit that at least. The sun shone gold on the newly harvested fields, and a flock of wild geese looked like tiny sailboats swimming across the endless blue of the sky. It seemed like the heavens were smiling down on the farm they've moved to, but Rab knew that the prettiness was just a trick of the light, hiding the rotten truth beneath. The land was so poor it was sucking the life from them and their father as they toiled over it, and in the winter their hilltop farm did little to keep the cold and the damp from the family huddled inside. Even the princely sum of £100 their father had borrowed from their landlord hadn't been enough to keep up with the repairs, and now they had a heavy debt to add to their struggles. "It's a rare sight, though, isn't it, no?" Gil tried again, nudging Rab and trying to coax a smile from him. "Aye, it's no bad," Rab had to admit. The one thing their farm had going for it was the view. Looking west in the full glow of autumn was enough to lift Rab's spirits no matter how tired he was. The Atlantic Ocean stretched out to the distant horizon. The sea wind whispered stories of daring and adventure in the boys' ears as they worked. Southwest, across the heads of air, small farms nestled in the gently rolling hills, and flocks of birds sought shelter there from the storms that rolled in from the coast. Nothing excited Rab more than the sight of the bustling town of Ayr in the distance. He couldn't see the busy streets and markets, or the old bridge across the river that had been patched so many times it was a wonder it hadn't crumbled beneath the cartwheels crossing it. But he knew exactly where the town lay, as it was marked out by the toll-booth spire and the old baronial tower they had nicknamed the Wallace Tower. Whenever he looked at it, Rab was reminded of his hero's adventures, and his pulse would quicken in excitement as he read the stories of daring and danger that he'd read. "You know what Wallace would tell you if he was passing through there with his army nowadays," Rab said. "What?" Gil asked. "He'd say you were a lazy wee gowk with no more than sense than a turnip. And he'd say you were a right lump with straw for brains." Gil grinned back. "Did you just declare war on me, you wee bogle?" "Aye, I did. What you do about it?" "Knock your head in. Rab laughed, aiming a playful blow that Gil sidestepped easily. "Prepare to do or die," Gil yelled, launching himself at Rab with a hoe for a sword. The clattering of wood scared the crows from the field as the boys danced through the mud. They were no longer two labourers with farm tools, but brave soldiers fighting for their lives of flashing steel. "I'm William Wallace, and this land is mine," Gil roared. "No, I'm 12 and more, so I'm William Wallace, and you're the invader," Rab fired back. "No fear, I'm turned 11, so I'm—" "Aw, Jings!" Gil cried when he swung his hoe so hard at Rab's rake that it snapped it in half. "Now you've gone and done it," Rab groaned. "Wait till Pa sees this, he'll—" "Boys, what in the name of goodness are you up to?" Rab and Gil had been too busy reenacting the Battle of Stirling Bridge to notice the sound of horses' hooves approaching. They turned to see their father in the lane, leading the plough horses home from the fields. Rab's cheeks were red with shame, but Gil was too young to notice the tarred lines etched in their father's face and the sweat that dripped down from his brow from the wheat threshing he'd been hard at all morning. "It wasn't me," Gil cried. "It was Rab. He started it." "And I'm ending it," William Burns growled. "You're no wee bairns. You're old enough to be trusted in the fields without keeping an eye on you. Lord knows I've got enough to do myself as it is." He was speaking to both of them, but Rab knew the rebuke was aimed at him, the eldest. He dropped his eye to the ground, mumbling, "Sorry, Pa, I'll take the hoe to the smithy to get patched tomorrow." "Aye, and how much will that cost? We can ill afford waste, Rab." Rab swallowed hard, guilt turning his tongue to heavy lead. "Come with me, Gilbert. The far fields need ploughed, and you've still a great deal to learn about keeping the furrow straight. Get back to work, Rab. That field needs cleared by the end of the week, so I can lime it before I sow the winter crop." Gil was only too happy to hand Rab his broken hoe and follow his father down the lane. Rab watched them disappear behind the hedgerows. The guilt and the shame left a bitter taste in his mouth. Life here was all work, and even 5 minutes of fun was too much to ask. And as for school and any real learning, he could forget about that. "I may no have straw for brains yet, but if I keep at this mindless work much longer, then the knowledge will be threshed out of my head, and bare stalks of learning will be all that's left," Rab thought, kicking hard at a stone in his way and stubbing his toe through his worn boot. "It's no fair. Other fathers can afford to hire labourers, and their boys can go to school. If we hadna moved to this midden of a farm then—" "Hey, Rab," a girl's voice called. "Are you ready to take a wee break?" "Clear off, Agnes, I'm busy," Rab snapped, aiming his anger at his youngest sister, who came trotting into the field wearing a pair of clogs that belonged to their mother. "I know you are, you big bletherskate. That's why I'm bringing you a basket. Will you no take a wee bite? Ma's too busy with the baby and the bairns to fix a midday meal at the house for you all." "Leave it down there then," Rab muttered, "and I'll maybe have it later." His stomach was rumbling loudly, and the oat scone and corked bottle of broth looked tasty, but he was still too sore from his father's telling off to have any kind words for his sister. "You're an ungrateful toad, Rab Burns." Agnes dumped the scone in the soup bottle down in the rock and clomped away along the mud. "And you're a sharp-tongued, you wee shrew," Rab called back. "Stop gadding about in the fields and go and help Ma in the house with the wee ones like you're supposed to." Agnes turned back and stuck her tongue out at him and ran back off down the lane. The sound of the wooden shoes tripping across the stones disappeared into the distance, and Rab's anger faded along with it. She was gone before Rab could call her back and tell her he didn't mean it, and thank her for thinking of him when she had so much else to do at home. Bad soil and poverty doesn't just make for poor crops, he thought, as he sat down on the rock and ate his lunch. It's making me grow crooked too. I've been crabbit with the wee ones all summer, since afore the harvest. The baby coming in June hadn't helped, and although he knew that new life was a blessing, he had 5 brothers and sisters already, and Isabella crying all through the night when they were all exhausted hadn't helped anyone's mood. Late evening, when the younger children were in bed, was the only time he had for himself for his precious reading, and he'd been too tired to focus on his books for months. Maybe things will get better when Isabella's a bit older and Ma and Pa aren't so tired, he thought. Maybe if I help Pa with the threshing this year, he'll have more time to help me with my studies, and I'll no wish for school so much. Maybe if I give Agnes some of my tatties at dinner, she'll still be cross with me, but happier with me a little. Maybe. The only certain thing was that Rab had a whole field of stones to clear by the end of the week, and sitting around daydreaming wasn't going to shift any rocks. He picked up his rake and started to work again, determined to ignore the ache in his back and the sting in his arms each time the metal head hit a buried rock and sent a jolt of pain up his body. By the time the sun was setting and his father and Gil had returned with the horses, Rab had cleared half the field and was rewarded by a satisfied nod as his dad passed by. "That's a good day's work, son. Are you coming in for your supper?" "Aye, I've just got this last basket to empty." He'd filled it over full and couldn't carry it, so he had to drag it to the far end of the field where the stones were piled ready to be carried away. The sun dipped low on the horizon as he tipped the stones out, and when he straightened back up again, he caught sight of something lying at the bottom of the basket. He reached it in and pulled it out. It was a small round stone that fitted perfectly into the palm of his hand, its edges smooth to the touch as polished marble. Rab stared at it in surprise. In the centre of the stone was a hole so perfectly round it looked almost like an eye gazing back at him. "James, that's an odd wee chunk of rock to find, and no mistake," he thought, turning it over in his fingers. "If I was as superstitious as our cousin Betty, I'd think maybe it was a fairy spyglass left behind when the wee folks danced through the fields at midnight." Smiling at the thought, he held it up and put his eye to the hole, looking through the centre of the stone. The sky seemed to grow darker all of a sudden. Rab shuddered. He hadn't noticed how red the sinking sun had become. Through the stone, the sky to the west looked bruised and blood-tinged, and the air from the sea held a salty chill. He was just about to drop the stone when a black-robed figure crossing the fields in the distance caught his attention. He squinted through the stone, trying to make out who it was against the crimson glare of the sun. The figure was hunched and stooped like an old woman, but there was something unnaturally fast about its movements, as though it were flying across the ground instead of walking. Its clothes flapped in the sudden breeze, fluttering like loose rags in the wind. Rab felt the cold clawing its way through his shirt all the way to his bones. There was something all wrong about this approaching figure, and he didn't want to stand around waiting to find out who it was. He threw the strange stone as hard as he could, watching in satisfaction as it bounced down the road and disappeared into a ditch. Then he gathered up the baskets and tools and set off across the fields for home. The sun disappeared as he reached the lane, but he knew his way too well now to be misled by moonlight. He rounded the corner of the track leading to the farmhouse and stopped dead. There, on the path, blocking his way home, stood an old woman dressed in black. So we'll leave the action in the Hag Storm there. And if you want to find out who the dark hunched woman was at the farmhouse entrance, then read The Hag Storm by Victoria Williamson. It really is a lovely spooky read with lots of learning to be done on its pages. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.